Now we are going to discuss what is classes and objects in Kotlin programming. So for that, first I'm going to create a package and the package name is classes. In this classes, I'm going to create a file and the file name is classes. Cool. So let's say you want to represent a box. Now box has a lot of properties, like it has length, width, height, and also it has volume, it has surface area. Basically it has a lot of things. Now if you want to represent a box in your programming language, on that case we'll create classes. Classes is nothing but a blueprint. On top of this blueprint we'll create objects. So if you want to create a class or blueprint of your box, you can simply use your class keyword. Okay, and after that you can give the name of your class. So in my case I'm using your box. Use small bracket. Now in this small bracket you can add the properties of your box. Like in our box we have three things. We have length, width and height. So create a variable corresponding to those. So first we have length. Type of this thing is float. Next we have width. Type of this thing is float. And lastly we have height. Type of this thing is float. So this is our box blueprint, and using this blueprint I will create certain objects that will represent different boxes. So let's see how we can do that. Create a main function and create a new variable. I'm gonna call this variable as box. Now I want to create a box. So use box small brackets, and in this small bracket you can pass the properties of your box. Like in my case length is 12f, width is 12f and height is 12f. Now this is called an object, and this object is used to represent a box that has length this, width 12 and height 12. So this is what class and objects. Class is nothing but is a blueprint, and using this blueprint you can create different boxes or objects. Now we are going to discuss what is this small bracket. Well, this small bracket is called primary constructor. So this is the first function which is executed when you created an object of your box. As you can see, once you are using this pair of small bracket and pass this length, width and height, this will be the first function that will be executed for your class. So this is what we call primary constructor. Now let's say you want to add functionality to your box class. So how can you do that? Let's say you want to calculate its surface area. So this is a functionality on top of our box class. Because all of our blueprint goes into this class, this is a reason we should put our functionality in this blueprint, so that if we create any object, this object has certain functionality, like you can use this object to calculate its surface area or volume, etc. So for that we will create a function, and the function name is calculate surface area. Return type of this thing is of course float, because all of our variable is a type of float. That's why I am returning here a float. Now I think you knew the formula. So 2 times bracket. So first we will use length into width plus width into height plus height into length. So this will eventually return me the surface area of my box. Now you can use this functionality to calculate surface area of this object, or you can say of this box. Let's see how we can do this thing. So for that you can simply use your object reference, which is box dot. As you can see, now we have a functionality calculate surface area, and this is created by us. Using this you can calculate the surface area. Now simply press enter, and this will eventually return you the surface area for this box. Now I'm gonna simply here use println to show you whether it is working or not. Click on this play button. Here you can see this is our surface area, and if you want to add more functionality you can do that thing very easily by just adding new functions. Now we are going to discuss what is access modifier. So for the time being, if I'm using here box dot length, length is accessible. Now let's say you want to make this length non-accessible from your object. How can you do that? Well, for these purposes we are having access modifier. So first access modifier is private. So if you are using here private keyword before the variable, then this variable is not accessible using your object. As you can see over here, we are not getting any suggestion regarding the length. Now if I'm using here width, it is available because we are not using private access modifier in front of our variable width. We have basically two types of access modifier. We have private, we have public, and by default if you are not using anything in here, it is public. So either you can use private or nothing. So private means you cannot access this variable using your object, and if you are not using anything, that means it is accessible. So this is what access modifier is. Now we will discuss about secondary constructor. So let's say I'm having a variable. By the way, you can create your class member variable within your primary constructor or within your pair of parentheses. So I want to create a color. Okay, so this is my member variable for this class, and I want to initialize this thing. So for that, let's use here secondary constructor. So use constructor keyword. Constructor is nothing but a function, as I already told you, and in this function we have to pass three things. So that three things will actually use to represent length, width and height, because this is present in our primary constructor. And if you are using any secondary constructor, this secondary constructor has responsibility to initialize primary constructor variables. So for that, I'm gonna use here a length, then I'm using here W for width and H for height, and lastly I'm gonna pass the color to initialize my color variable. Now if you want to initialize your primary constructor variables via secondary constructor, on that case just use your colon this, and in this you can pass your length, width and height. So we are getting length in a form of L, we are getting width in a form of W, we are getting H in a form of H within our secondary constructor. Now we are having color. Use here pair of parentheses, and in this pair of parentheses I am going to initialize my color variable. So as you can see, the name of this color and this color is pretty much same. So how can we make differentiator between these two? Well, if you want to make differentiator between these two, you can use here this. So this will point to your class. Now this class has a variable color, so this dot color will eventually represent this color. Now you can initialize this thing with color, and yeah, that's it. We have a problem, and I think the problem is late init modifier. So late init modifier is actually used when you want to initialize your variable lately, right? So on that case you can use here late init variable, and that's it. Now we have two constructor. You can use this constructor to build your box, or you can use this constructor to build your box. So let's use this secondary constructor to build our box. So for that we have length, width and height. Lastly I'm gonna pass the color, so color is red, and this time it uses secondary constructor to build our box. Now I want to print its color, so for that use box. Because this is a private late into variable, this is not accessible, so I'm gonna create a function get color, and this will eventually return the color. Now use here box dot color and execute it, but before that remove this box dot width. See, it is red. So this is what primary constructor and secondary constructor.